Buried deep in the rugged Appalachian peaks, a mountaineer's secret survival strategy defied the fiercest storms. When the harsh winter winds howled and the snow buried every trail, his hidden ice shelf became his lifeline, storing meat where no one would think to look. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love survival stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's tale could be even more daring than this one. Winter had arrived early in the Appalachian Mountains that year. The peaks stood like ancient sentinels, shrouded in thick blankets of snow, the wind howling through the trees in a cold fury. Yet, for Samuel Cole, the harshness of the storm didn't bring fear, but rather a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had spent years preparing for moments like this, days like this, when the mountain could turn against him in a blink. And yet, through it all, he would survive. But the secret to his survival was not just his skill with a rifle or his knowledge of the land. It was hidden beneath the snow, an ingenious method that no one could have anticipated. Samuel had always known the mountain could be both cruel and kind, offering life and death in equal measure. After spending the better part of his life in the backcountry, hunting and trapping through every season, he had learned the land's deepest rhythms. Yet, in the winter months, when game became scarce, and even the most seasoned hunter struggled to find food, he found himself facing a unique challenge: how to preserve his meat through the storms. Most mountaineers relied on their smokehouses, but Samuel knew those structures wouldn't withstand the relentless storms of the Appalachian winter. He needed something more, a place where the meat could be stored safely, far from the reach of animals, and free from the thawing heat that would spoil it. That's when Samuel came across an old natural ice shelf while scouting for a new hunting route. It was hidden in a cave-like recess beneath the mountain's surface, so cold and so deep that even the most biting storms couldn't reach it. At first, the idea seemed too simple, but as winter settled in, he couldn't help but marvel at the untouched promise of the ice shelf. It was a natural freezer, ready-made by the mountain itself, but it wasn't just the shelf's natural properties that intrigued him. It was the secrecy it provided. The ice shelf was tucked away in a small, almost invisible hollow beneath a heavy cluster of pine trees, unreachable by animals and unsuspecting travelers. Samuel had the perfect spot to store his carefully butchered game without worry. And with the threat of food spoiling or attracting unwanted attention in the dead of winter, it gave him peace of mind. As the storm clouds rolled in and the wind howled louder, Samuel began hauling his meat from the cabin, wrapping it securely in burlap and string. Each piece was carefully placed within the frozen hollow, nestled deep into the ice, where it would remain safe until spring. The storm would pass, but the ice shelf would keep his food fresh, hidden, and untouched. It was a survival tactic that would, in time, save him countless times. But no one knew of it yet, for now it was just another secret in the vast wilderness. The storm was no mere snowstorm. This was a mountain's wrath. Samuel had seen his fair share of harsh winters, raging snowstorms that seemed to come from nowhere, dumping inches of snow in hours and turning once passable trails into treacherous rivers of ice. But this storm was different. The cold it brought was fierce, unlike any he had experienced before. The mountain was covered in a thick, oppressive fog that made the trees appear like silhouettes. The wind bit deeper, stinging his skin and numbing his fingers as he worked to seal up his cabin. Inside, the fire crackled, but Samuel could feel the chill in the air creeping through every crack and crevice. The storm raged through the night, shaking the cabin's walls and rattling its foundation. Snow piled up in thick drifts, covering the door and windows. His trap lines were completely inaccessible, and the game he had managed to hunt and store was all he had left. The fire could only keep him warm for so long. His thoughts turned to the ice shelf, hidden beneath the snow-covered earth. The meat was safe there, and it would stay fresh no matter how fierce the storm became. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The mountain was a living, breathing creature with moods of its own, and right now it was angry. If the storm lasted longer than expected, or if the temperatures dropped even further, he might find himself locked inside the cabin with no way to gather fresh food. He needed the ice shelf to stay safe, undisturbed, and frozen. As the wind howled through the trees outside, Samuel checked his supplies once more. His cabin was stocked with everything he needed: pelts, firewood, dried goods. But the certainty that the storm could stretch on for days, perhaps weeks, kept him restless. He knew that the storm could bury the mountain in snow so deep that he wouldn't be able to leave. The next few weeks could decide whether he survived or not. Outside, the storm intensified. The wind began to sound more like the roar of an angry beast, pushing against the cabin with an unrelenting force. Inside, the temperature plummeted further as Samuel's thoughts drifted back to the hidden ice shelf. The meat there, preserved and waiting, was a lifeline in this unforgiving world. He only hoped the storm wouldn't find it first. The storm raged for days, its fury unyielding. The wind shrieked through the cracks in the logs of Samuel's cabin, but he remained inside, surrounded by the comforting glow of the hearth. He checked the fire every hour, keeping it stoked, aware that if it died, the cold would creep in quickly. Yet even as the warmth from the fire filled the room, an uneasy tension gripped Samuel's thoughts. Each gust of wind, every creak from the settling logs, seemed to echo the looming danger outside. The mountain, once so familiar, now felt like an unpredictable beast, capable of swallowing the unprepared whole. Samuel had heard stories, tales from other mountain men, about men who had gone out to check their traps and never returned, swallowed by storms or lost in the deep snowdrifts. It was easy to get trapped in the wilderness, too far from shelter to make it back before the storm took hold. The wind outside howled with an ominous energy, reminding Samuel of the mountain's power. A misplaced step, a sudden misjudgment in such weather could lead to disaster. But for now, he knew he had one advantage the others didn't: the ice shelf. His hidden cache of meat was untouched by the storm. He had spent the past year perfecting his method of preservation, and in this moment he felt a quiet sense of pride. While others would be forced to eat their last stores or risk venturing out in the dangerous weather, Samuel could remain insulated from such desperation. His food was secure. He could wait the storm out. Still, that did not mean the mountain was finished with him. No, nature had a way of revealing its sharp claws when least expected. Late on the third day, after the storm had reached its peak, Samuel heard something unsettling, an unusual thudding noise against the cabin's door. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the roar of the storm, but then the noise grew louder. Thud, thud, thud. It was too rhythmic to be the wind or falling branches. Samuel stood still, his breath held, trying to process the sound. He crept toward the door, peering through a crack in the window. What he saw nearly stopped his heart. The heavy snow that had built up around his cabin had attracted something large. A set of massive tracks in the snow led up to his door, and they weren't from a deer or any of the smaller creatures he hunted. No, these were the unmistakable signs of a bear, heavy clawed footprints that spoke of a creature much larger and far more dangerous. Samuel's heart quickened, his instincts taking over. The bear was out there, circling the cabin, and if it could find a way in, it would ravage everything in its path, including his prized meat stash. His mind raced. The ice shelf would hold, of course. But there was a problem. The bear had been attracted to the warmth of the cabin, likely smelling the food inside or sensing the slight humidity escaping from under the door. Samuel had always known that the smell of meat would be a temptation for any animal, and that his secure storage depended on absolute isolation. If the bear realized the scent was coming from his cabin, it wouldn't stop until it found the source. Grabbing his rifle, Samuel approached the door with caution. The storm outside had silenced much of the surrounding sounds, but the thudding continued, growing louder with each moment. He couldn't let the bear get closer. He'd have to act fast, before it realized what was waiting just inside the walls. Samuel's breath was shallow as he crouched low behind a stack of firewood, rifle in hand. The thudding outside the cabin had intensified into a steady pounding, as if the bear was testing the door, pushing against it with relentless force. Every thud sent a ripple of unease through Samuel, who knew that his cabin, though sturdy, wasn't invincible. A determined bear, especially one driven by hunger and instinct, could tear through even the toughest wood. He steadied his grip on the rifle, his finger poised over the trigger, though he knew the danger wasn't in the cabin yet. His real concern lay outside. If the bear became too curious or too desperate, it would begin testing every potential weakness. The logs around the door were old, weathered by time and the elements. The gaps between the wood were small, but not small enough to keep a bear's claws from prying. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he heard the bear's claws scrape along the logs, testing the door with increasing ferocity. This wasn't the first time he'd faced such a threat. But something about this storm, the sheer intensity of it, felt different. There was an unnerving energy in the air, a sense of impending danger that Samuel couldn't shake. He had long learned to trust his instincts in these situations, and right now they were screaming at him to move quickly. The bear's next strike was heavier, accompanied by a loud creak from the doorframe. Samuel's mind raced through possible plans. If the bear found a weak spot, it would break in. His food, his safety, everything would be gone in a heartbeat. He needed a diversion. Cautiously, he rose to his feet, moving silently towards the rear window of the cabin. The window was small, but it provided him with a clear view of the surrounding wilderness. Through the fogged glass, he could just make out the bear's hulking shape, its massive form moving against the storm, testing the door once again. A plan began to form in Samuel's mind, a dangerous one, but his only option. He knew the bear was focused on the door, the only point of entry that smelled of meat. If he could draw the bear's attention away, perhaps by creating a loud noise or distraction further from the cabin, he could lead it away before it destroyed everything he had worked for. But as he prepared to move, a sharp noise outside caught his attention, a growl, deep and guttural, sending a chill down his spine. The bear had detected something. Perhaps it had caught wind of the hidden ice shelf. Perhaps the storm was masking other sounds, making the food inside more tempting. Whatever the case, Samuel had little time left. His grip tightened around the rifle, his mind clear now, focused solely on the task at hand. He would fight for his survival. And in this world, survival meant everything. The air inside the cabin was thick with tension. Samuel's heart thudded in his chest, every beat echoing in his ears as he crouched by the window, watching the bear outside. The storm had not relented, the snow still falling in thick, blinding sheets, but the world outside was eerily quiet except for the deep guttural growls coming from the massive creature. The bear's enormous claws scraped against the wooden door again, sending a fresh wave of dread through Samuel. The growl that had caught his attention earlier was not a warning. It was the sound of a predator that had locked onto its prey. And Samuel was the target. His mind raced. A bear could be relentless once it had decided to feast, and in the dead of winter, when food was scarce, it would take every opportunity it could find. The hidden ice shelf, his lifeline, was now at risk. If the bear could smell the meat inside, there was no way it would leave. It had already proven its persistence, circling the cabin like a patient hunter, waiting for the right moment to strike. Samuel's grip tightened around his rifle as he steeled himself for what had to come next. He could no longer wait for the bear to tire itself out. He had to act. The question was, how? If he fired from the window, the bear might charge the cabin, and the door wouldn't hold long under the weight of the beast's attack. But if he didn't do anything, the bear would soon be inside, ravaging everything he had worked for. He glanced toward the door, watching as the bear took another swipe at the frame. It was only a matter of time before it broke through. Samuel knew he couldn't risk opening the door to face the animal directly. It would be a fight he couldn't win. But there was another way. There was a small, barely visible hole in the corner of the cabin's rear wall, a leftover gap from when the cabin had been built years ago. Samuel had always meant to seal it, but in the chaos of winter preparation, it had been forgotten. Now, that small hole might just be the answer. If he could draw the bear's attention away from the door, he could slip out and circle around to the back, firing from a concealed position where he would have the upper hand. The bear's next swipe at the door sent a loud crack through the air, and Samuel's chance came. He grabbed a nearby log from the pile and with all his strength hurled it toward the far side of the cabin. The loud thud as it hit the wall was enough. The bear froze for a moment, its head whipping toward the noise. Samuel darted for the back of the cabin, moving quickly and silently. As he reached the hole, he felt a surge of adrenaline. The bear was distracted. This was his one and only chance. The cold air cut through Samuel as he slipped through the small hole in the cabin's back wall. His rifle was cradled in his arms, and he kept his movements slow and deliberate. The wind from the storm whipped around him, biting at his exposed skin, but he barely noticed it. His entire focus was on the task ahead, staying out of sight, keeping quiet, and preparing for the bear's next move. The sound of the storm was deafening now, a constant roar that filled his ears. But Samuel knew the bear's growl would be just as loud, even in the midst of the wind. He stayed low to the ground, using the thick snow as cover as he made his way around the cabin to where he hoped the bear would be. On the other side, its back turned as it investigated the noise. His breath came in shallow gasps as he moved, each step calculated, knowing that even the smallest mistake could cost him everything. He had no intention of getting too close to the bear, but he needed a clear shot. The rifle in his hands felt both like a lifeline and a weight. The decision he was about to make would be the difference between survival and disaster, between protecting his food and losing it all. The meat in the ice shelf wasn't just sustenance. It was the result of careful planning, years of knowledge, and hard work. The bear was still circling the cabin, sniffing the air, its large nose twitching. Samuel could see it now, a massive silhouette against the backdrop of the swirling snow. It was pacing back and forth, seemingly confused by the recent noise. Samuel crept closer, his body hidden in the thick snow, making sure to remain downwind. He couldn't afford for the bear to catch his scent. His fingers hovered over the rifle's trigger, steady and deliberate. The bear's next step brought it closer to his firing line, and Samuel's eyes narrowed. He knew it was a dangerous shot, too risky, but there was no time to waste. With a steady breath, Samuel pulled the rifle's trigger. The crack of the gunshot cut through the storm like a bolt of lightning, echoing across the wilderness. The bear's head jerked back, its body shuddering as the bullet hit its target. For a moment, there was silence. Then the bear roared in fury, stumbling back and lashing out with its claws. The shot had wounded it, but the bear was still very much alive, and it was enraged. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest. He had to act quickly. The bear was turning toward him now, its eyes wild with pain and fury. He wasn't safe yet. A new wave of panic surged through him, but he forced it back down. He knew what he had to do: keep moving, stay out of its line of sight, and use every bit of the terrain to his advantage. The hunt had truly begun. The bear's roar echoed in the storm, a terrifying primal sound that reverberated in Samuel's bones. The bullet had done its work. It had struck the creature's shoulder, but the beast was far from done. It spun around, its massive body lurching toward the sound of the gunshot, its eyes locked onto the source of its pain. Samuel's pulse quickened as the bear's heavy footfalls rang through the snow, its anger propelling it toward him. Samuel's mind raced. He had only a few precious seconds before the bear closed in. The storm was still howling, but the space between him and the creature had closed to a mere 10 yards. He darted behind a large boulder, using it as cover, his breath shallow, the cold cutting into his skin like a knife. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to run for his life, but he knew better. Running would only make him a target. The bear was faster, more powerful, and its senses were keen. It would catch him, and there would be no escape. His rifle still hung in his hands, the weight of it reassuring but heavy. Samuel adjusted his position, trying to get a better view of the approaching beast. His heart hammered in his chest as he counted the seconds. The bear was close, too close. He could hear its labored breathing now, each breath a gust of steam in the frigid air. It was searching for him, its head swinging left and right, sniffing the air, looking for a trace of him in the snow. He dared not make a sound. Every movement, every breath could give him away. The storm's fury masked some of the sounds, but it also hid his position. He had to rely on the storm as much as he relied on the terrain. The wind howled again, muffling everything, but Samuel could feel the weight of the bear's approach, the ground trembling with each of its steps. The bear paused. For a moment it stood still, as if the storm itself had confused it. Samuel's muscles were tense, coiled like a spring, his eyes fixed on the massive shape just beyond his cover. The bear's large nostrils flared as it sniffed the air once more, trying to pinpoint where Samuel had gone. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. He had one shot, one chance to stop this. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his rifle. The storm raged, but in that moment, everything around him seemed to disappear. The world had narrowed to the bear's hulking form, its dark eyes locked with his, its chest heaving with every breath. Then, without warning, the bear charged. It moved with a terrifying speed, its massive paws thudding against the snow. Samuel raised his rifle, took aim, and fired. The world exploded in sound. The shot rang out, a deafening crack that cut through the storm. The bear's roar filled the air again, but this time it was a roar of pain. The bullet struck it square in the chest, and the force of the blow knocked the beast back. But the bear wasn't done yet. It stumbled but didn't fall. It was wounded, but its fury only grew. It was still coming, its eyes burning with rage. Samuel cursed under his breath. The fight was far from over. The bear was still charging, still determined to break through. He had only one option left. He turned, running as fast as he could toward the cabin. There was no other choice now. He needed to get inside, barricade himself, and hope the storm would give him a chance to survive. The wind screamed in Samuel's ears as he sprinted through the snow, his breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps. His legs burned with the effort, and the storm seemed to close in around him, the snow stinging his face, blurring his vision. Behind him the bear was relentless, its roar growing louder as it charged through the snow, its massive form closing in. Samuel could hear the bear's claws tearing into the frozen ground, feel the ground tremble beneath each of its thunderous steps. He pushed harder, his boots slipping in the deep snow, but he had to reach the cabin. He had to make it inside. The door was just ahead, but he could feel the bear gaining on him, its fury undeterred by the pain of the bullets in its body. It was fast, too fast, and Samuel's legs were tiring, the cold seeping into his bones, slowing him down. The cabin door loomed ahead, but it seemed so far away, the storm and the bear both closing in with every passing moment. Samuel's mind raced as he thought of his options. He couldn't outrun the bear, and there was no time to try to reload his rifle. His only chance was to make it to the door, get inside, and lock himself in before the beast could reach him. But he knew he couldn't make it without a fight. With a final burst of energy, Samuel lunged toward the door, his hand outstretched, reaching for the handle. The bear was nearly on top of him, its claws slashing at the air. Just as his fingers brushed the door, the bear lunged, its massive body smashing into him, sending him crashing to the ground with bone-shaking force. For a moment, everything went black. The wind howled, the snow swirled around him, and the world was nothing but cold, pain, and confusion. Then Samuel felt the bear's claws rake across his side, its powerful jaws snapping close to his face. He had no time to think. He had only time to act. With a grunt of pain, Samuel managed to roll to his feet, ducking just in time to avoid the bear's next strike. The beast roared, its body swaying, disoriented by the attack. Samuel grabbed for the rifle that had fallen beside him in the snow, his fingers numb from the cold, but still able to wrap around the cold steel. The bear was close, too close. With a desperate roar of his own, Samuel raised the rifle and fired again, this time aiming for the beast's head. The shot rang out, deafening in the storm. The bear staggered back, blood pouring from its wound. For a moment it seemed stunned, its wild eyes glazing over. But the fight wasn't over. The bear wasn't done. Samuel's heart raced and his thoughts blurred with panic. The bear wasn't going to stop, not now, not unless he finished it off. As the bear took another step forward, Samuel aimed once more, the rifle steady in his hands. He couldn't miss this time. The storm raged on, but in that moment, all he could focus on was survival, his and the bear's. The bear's growl was a low, guttural sound that vibrated through the ground beneath Samuel's feet. It was all he could hear as the beast loomed just a few yards away, its eyes narrowed with fury, its breath coming in ragged gasps. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the next. The storm raged around him, but in this moment everything had narrowed to the bear. It was relentless, driven by the primal instinct to survive, and it was intent on making Samuel its prey. His hand gripped the rifle tightly, the cold steel of it comforting in the face of his impending death. He had been here before, facing down impossible odds, but this time felt different. This wasn't just a battle of survival, this was a test of will. And Samuel knew, deep in his bones, that only one of them would walk away from this encounter. The bear was staggering now. Whoa, its movement sluggish from the wounds he had inflicted. It had taken 2 bullets, one to the shoulder, the other to the chest, but the beast's will to live was strong. It didn't show fear, it only showed hunger. Samuel knew that if he didn't end it now, if he didn't take the bear down with this final shot, it would charge again, and the next time, it might not give him the chance to fire. He steadied himself, ignoring the cold seeping into his bones, focusing only on the task at hand. He could see the bear's massive chest rising and falling, its eyes locked onto his. The storm howled again, the wind cutting through the trees, but Samuel didn't flinch. He knew what he had to do. The bear took a step forward, then another. The ground shook beneath its weight, and Samuel's body tensed. The time for hesitation was over. He inhaled deeply, the cold air burning his lungs, and aimed carefully at the bear's head. The rifle felt steady in his hands, its weight familiar, despite the chaos of the storm. He had done this before, taken down prey, hunted in the wilderness, faced danger head-on. But this was different. This was survival. This was life or death. He pulled the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed through the wilderness, sharp and final. The bullet tore through the air, striking the bear square between the eyes. For a moment everything was still. The storm, the wind, the world, everything paused as the bear's body jerked, and then it collapsed, falling heavily to the ground with a deafening thud. The fight was over. Samuel stood there breathless, his body frozen in place as the realization hit him. He had done it. He had survived. But there was no relief. There was no moment of triumph, just the weight of what had happened. The bear, once a creature of pure aggression and instinct, was now a lifeless heap in the snow. Samuel didn't approach it immediately. Instead, he took a moment to gather himself, letting the storm rage around him. He had faced the beast, and now it was time to face the consequences of the battle. The fight had been brutal, but in the end, it had been necessary. He had preserved his life, his food, and his shelter. And he had learned once again that the mountain would never be tamed. With a slow, measured breath, Samuel turned toward the cabin, his rifle still gripped tightly in his hands. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, just the knowledge that, for now, the mountain had been bested. But it was only a temporary triumph. The wilderness never stopped, never relented. Samuel knew that, but for today he had survived. The storm had finally begun to subside. the relentless winds dying down as the snow settled into a heavy silence. The world outside was still, the air thick with the weight of the battle that had just occurred. Samuel stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes fixed on the fallen bear, the rifle still in his hand. His breath came in shallow gasps, the adrenaline of the fight now fading into exhaustion. He felt the sting of his wounds, scratches from the bear's claws, bruises from the impact of its charge, but it was the emotional toll that lingered. It was strange how something so primal, so raw, could leave him feeling hollow inside. He had faced death in many forms, in countless battles against nature, but this was different. This time, the fight had not been for survival in the abstract. This time, it had been personal. The bear wasn't just a threat. It was a reflection of the wilderness itself, a reminder of how tenuous life could be in this unforgiving world. Samuel took a long, steadying breath, watching as the storm continued to recede into the distance. The sky had begun to clear, the clouds breaking apart to reveal the pale blue of the afternoon sky. The winds were gentler now, and the snow, which had been swirling in a violent frenzy just hours ago, had slowed to a gentle flurry. The calm after the storm was almost eerie, as if the mountain was holding its breath, waiting for something. His mind turned to the ice shelf, the hidden cache of meat he had worked so hard to protect. The bear had been a near-fatal distraction, and he knew that the danger wasn't over. It would only take a few more days of intense cold for the bear's scent to dissipate, for the mountain to return to its routine, and for him to continue his life. But there was still work to be done. With slow, deliberate steps, Samuel made his way back to the cabin. The door creaked as he opened it, the warmth from the fire greeting him like an old friend. The comfort of home was fleeting, but it was all he had. His hands were stiff from the cold, his muscles sore from the fight. But there was no time to rest. He checked the fireplace first, ensuring the flames were still burning strong. He could feel the heat of the fire on his face, the warmth slowly seeping back into his frozen limbs. The cabin, his refuge, was still standing, still secure. But he knew that the wilderness never rested. There would always be another storm, another challenge to face. It was the nature of the life he had chosen, a life bound to the land, to the cycles of the mountain. Samuel made his way to the back of the cabin where the ice shelf lay, hidden beneath the snow. He paused for a moment, his hand resting on the doorframe. The world outside was quiet now, the battle won. But there was no relief. There was only the knowledge that in this harsh world, survival was never guaranteed. But for now, the meat in the ice shelf was safe. For now, he had what he needed, and that would have to be enough. As the storm faded into the distance and the quiet of the Appalachian mountains settled in, Samuel Cole stood at the threshold of his cabin, a man who had survived, and that, in the end, was all that mattered.